Hi everybody, it's Franny, and we're finally done with the 3.2 Carrera project, so it's time to focus on the Ferrari. Now this is a 1985 Ferrari 308 QV. This is the Euro model, and we bought this car a few years ago, but it had some issues with the engine, and we got those sorted, and the car is running beautifully. But we have a lot of other work to do on the car. We've got suspension work to do, some interior work to do, and some exterior stuff to do on the car as well. We also do have a few little things to do on the engine, so we'll get to those as well. I think this is going to be a really fun series. So this is just an introduction, but I want to run you through each of the sections of the car that we want to work on and point out to you exactly what we want to get done. Let's take a look at this interior. It's mostly original, actually. The seats have never been recovered. The carpet is original, but you know, since this is a 1985, this stuff has seen quite a few years and a bit of use. Our car has somewhere close to about 50,000 miles on it, and the interior shows that. We have had some stuff done. We did get the seats sort of resprayed, which is a bit of a stopgap, and these seats are finally starting to kind of go, and I think we're going to have to get them recovered. Remember from the 3.2 Carrera series, we had our boy Juan do all of our work on that car. He's going to be our go-to guy on this car as well, and he can source the very special leather for these seats and pretty much build them by hand. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be super cool. As for the rest of the interior, I've already done a bunch of work on it, but I'm sure we'll find some little bits here and there that we need to touch up. So I think it's going to be pretty fun, and I can't wait. These seats, as they are right now, are pretty uncomfortable. The bolsters are too hard and firm. I think the foam's just gotten hard in there, so that's going to have to be rebuilt. There's a big crack in the driver's seat at the bottom, so that's going to have to be fixed. And we've got some small details. The headrests have a small impression of the cavallino rampante, so that the prancing horse, and that needs to be replicated on the new seats, and that's going to be a bit of a trick, but we'll get that done. A couple of other things we need to get done in the interior here are the windows. They're super slow to go up and down, and that's really a problem with Ferrari grease back in the day, really. It sounds funny, but that grease gets really old and turns to almost varnish over time, and then the mechanisms just can't turn in it. In fact, our driver's door wouldn't shut because the mechanism just wouldn't work with all that grease in it. And I had to take it all apart, clean it all out, put it all back together, and it's worked flawlessly. Well, doing the windows is going to be a little more work, pulling the regulators out, cleaning all that yucky grease out, re-greasing the whole thing, and we may even need to restring them. Because unlike the 3.2 Carrera, which had sort of a scissor action on the windows, these windows are cable driven. So we might have to replace the cable or adjust the cable. It's going to be a bit of a thing. So that's another, I think, fairly big project we need to get done on the interior. Up at the front of the car here, it looks really good, but it's just not quite correct. This grille has 5 verticals on it, and it should have 7 for our Euro QV. And also, we're missing our flash to pass lights here and there. So they look kind of like fog lights up front, but they're really not, because these cars have their pop-up headlights and it takes too long for them to come up and flash. So they added lights on both sides, but they're missing, and I imagine they went away sometime in the past when this wrong grille was installed. So we're going to have to source a new grille for the car and a new set of lights, kind of tear this whole front bit apart and get all that installed as well. Under the car, I can show you a couple of things we need to get to. One is a leaky shift rod seal. So this is kind of a big deal. The shift rod runs actually through the engine sump back to the transmission. So there's a seal on the outside. There's also a seal on the inside between the engine and the transmission. We're going to need to replace both of those seals, because if one of them's bad, I pretty much guarantee the other one's going. And if the internal one goes bad, then oil can leak out of the engine into the transmission and overflow the transmission. So that's kind of bad. That'll require taking these plates off the bottom and then sourcing those seals, installing the seals, putting it all back together. It's going to be kind of a big deal. But you can see we've got a bit of oil leak underneath here, and it's really annoying. And I know it's just a time bomb waiting to go off. So that is a big project we'll be getting to under the car. But probably our biggest project is going to be the suspension on all 4 corners. Looking up at the suspension here, we have a double A-arm suspension, which is kind of neat. plate on this car and 4 Coney shocks all the way around, but our bushings have perished on our A-arms, and I believe our Coney shocks, which are up in here, are in need of a good rebuild. That is going to be a bit of work, and I have to be very careful about the alignment on this car because it's all done with shims, and I'll have to be very careful to get it back together as close as possible so that when we get it all back together we can take it down and get it aligned. But you have to be fairly close so that you don't have problems on the road getting to the alignment shop. So there's going to be a bunch of documentation on this. It's a little bit fiddly. Those bushings are welded in, they're spot welded in, so they're going to have to be ground out and pushed out. So it's going to be a little bit involved. And as I said, we have all 4 corners to do, the rears and the fronts as well. We have another small sort of oil weep. It's not really a leak. It's up inside here where the oil cooler is, the line to the oil cooler. So we're going to have to get to that and see if we can cinch that down and get that to stop leaking. Now, we made a big in-depth video detailing all the costs of everything we've done on the car up to this point, so I'll link that down below. But I'll give you a little summary here. And let's start with the engine. One thing to know is that the previous owner lived on a long dirt road, and the engine was a disaster. It was caked from one end to the other with mud and clay. It was terrible. But that wasn't our biggest problem. We did get a PPI on the car before we bought it, but what they didn't find were 2 bent exhaust valves. So that was a real problem. We tried to get the car through emissions. It wouldn't go. So we took it to a shop locally here, and it took them a little bit of time to figure out what was going on. But after a leak down test, they found those 2 bent valves. That meant that the engine had to come out, the heads had to come off, and we had quite a bit of work to do on the top end of the engine. Another big problem was that one of the heads would not come off. The shop spent an enormous amount of time trying to get that head off, but in the end it had to be cut into pieces and pulled off, which was just tragic. We sent the heads off to California to be machined. They replaced all the valve guides, and we had 12 valves that were out of spec, so 12 new valves. All of the springs were out of spec, and they fly cut the heads. With the heads back, the engine could be reassembled. We replaced the fuel lines and all the hoses. We also got the warm-up regulator rebuilt. And I mentioned all that dirt and grime. Well, the alternator and starter were just an absolute disaster. So we sent those off to get them rebuilt as well. So in the end, we had new injectors, new plugs, a complete new belt service, and new accessory belts. We also did a few cosmetic touches to the engine. One was we got the plenum powder coated, and that just looks great. We also had to do the CV boots. They were ripped and needed to be replaced, so the axles had to come off, and several of the bolts were stripped and just a mess, so we had to replace some hardware there as well. It's a pretty straightforward job, just very messy. We were also able to source the original Euro muffler for the car. That was a great upgrade. Once the car was back on the road again and we were driving it, we did come across a few other issues. Notably, the worst was the brake booster failure. I got in the car to move the car backwards out of the garage, and I heard this hissing noise that turned out to be the brake booster. That was a problem. We had to send that off to California, and it's a little strange and a little difficult to get rebuilt. It's built by Bendix, but it's an Italian version of it, so the parts are hard to get. While it was out there, we had them rebuild the master cylinder as well, kind of one of those while you're in there things. Moving on to more cosmetic issues, we did have a few dents removed on the car, and then we did take it in also to get it buffed and ceramic coated. That makes the car so much easier to take care of. Now, I mentioned earlier the seats were resprayed. That's something else we did, and we did that sort of to have the whole interior match because it just wasn't quite matching, and there was some weird spotting on the center console and a few other things. When we bought the car, it had a high-end stereo system in it and an amplifier that wasn't hooked up and these big, huge speakers in the doors. I wanted to pull all that out and put in something that was a bit more period correct. The speakers were a real problem because they had ruined the original leather perforated speaker grills. So I had to go and remake both of those speaker grills by hand. One final thing on the interior was the door locks didn't work. Now, this car has electric door locks, but the motor-driven actuators had actually melted melted on the driver's side and were ruined. So I had to replace both of those. It was a bit of work, but they now work just fine. So we have had quite a bit of work done to the car up to this point, but I think the new work is going to take it to a new level. We've got quite a few projects to do on the car, so this was just an introduction to everything we're going to get done. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit the subscribe button and then the little bell next to it, because boy, we got a lot of content coming up and you're not going to want to miss any of it. Alright, well thank you so much for watching, and as always a very special thank you to our Patreon supporters. Until next time, safe travels. Bye!